So today we're going to talk about the road to $100,000. Now, this may sound like complete fantasy land to you, but as an owner operator, I'm telling you, you could get there. And it may not even take as long as you think it takes. But, it's the decisions that you make along the way that's going to determine how quickly you reach $100,000. So Charlie Munger, we mention Charlie Munger all the time. Charlie Munger is famous billionaire uh, partner with Warren Buffett, and they're part of Berkshire Hathaway. So these guys are famous investors. They're famous for being wealthy. And his famous quote for investors, what new investors need to know is, your first 100,000 is the hardest money you will ever make in your entire 40 years in your working adult life. And that first $100,000 that you save and invest, that's the hardest money you will ever make. After that, it gets easier. So, if you want life to be easier, you want money to come to you easier, you know, you have to save that first $100,000. Um, I will tell you that, I got there, but I got there in a kind of roundabout way. It took me a long time to reach $100,000. Now I could have done it much quicker, but I didn't learn about the importance of that first $100,000 until probably a few years ago. So here I was, an owner operator for the last 10 years. I didn't learn about this until a few years ago. Had I learned about it earlier, I would have pursued it earlier. But you know, I don't think I was, financially literate to the point where I knew what I was doing, that I knew that saving $100,000 was important. I had no idea. You know, um, Many people are are not taught in school or by their family or whomever how to save money and how to invest money. They're not taught this. Nobody teaches you, the importance of saving and investing. Nobody. You look at your high school, you look at your community college, you look at your four-year university. They don't teach you. They don't teach you this. This is probably the most important thing in life to know, and they don't teach it. So you never got the memo because there was no memo. Nobody handed out the memo, nobody taught the memo, nobody espoused the virtues of the memo. There was no memo. It was like, how did I miss this? Well, because no one taught you. No, nobody. It wasn't very common decades ago. um, you know if you look at your family history, decades ago, your previous generations, they weren't financially literate. They are probably hardworking, trying to become middle class. That's kind of like the American story. Is the American dream was to be able to afford your own home. So just being able to buy a house for previous generations was the ultimate achievement, that they could do, was be able to afford the American dream, to be able to afford a house. That was their goal. This idea of saving money and investing it, that nobody did that. Nobody. You know, uh, Years ago, before the internet, I know that sounds like ancient times, but we used to have things called newspapers, and it had a business section. And in the last page or two of the business section, it was just couple pages of listing stocks and the change in price from the previous day. You know, Information was slow. I mean, think about that. You didn't know what a stock. You know, People didn't have brokers. There was no E-Trade. There was no Robinhood. You didn't have a brokerage account. You've probably heard of a broker, but you didn't know what it was. And you probably didn't know too many people who own stock. So it's not uncommon for people to be financially illiterate when it comes to this stuff. But over the decades, this has changed. Um, Nowadays, it's very common for drivers to be investors. They're hauling loads, they're saving their money, and they're investing their money. And they're on E-Trade, Robinhood. You got brokerage accounts with their individual banks. Buying and selling stocks regularly. But a few decades ago, nobody did it. Nowadays, a lot of people are doing it. So there's been a shift in the demographics of who is the investor. Now it's becoming more commonplace. So, now there's a memo. The memo's been written, the memo's been handed out, but still there's people out there that, have not read the memo, didn't get the memo, don't understand the memo, things like this. And I'm here to tell you this is what the deal is. If you want to be financially literate, you want to be able to grow your money, this is how you do it. You gotta aim for that first $100,000. I know it sounds just so far fetched. I mean, because you're probably struggling to make ends meet, and I certainly was in that boat before I got into trucking. I couldn't save 25,000, and here you're trying to tell me I need to save 100,000. It's like, before I got into trucking, if my monthly budget came out to where I was $500 ahead of the game, I felt pretty lucky. I felt like that was a good month. But once I got into trucking, especially once I became an owner operator and I had my own small business, that's when, the light bulb kind of starts warming up. Now you're starting to realize that you got some money to work with. Before you couldn't even dream of reaching 100,000. Now it seems possible. I'm not going to say it comes easy, but it seems possible. Because now you're going to make more money. So I will tell you, my path to 100,000 was, you know, quite bumpy. First of all, I didn't even know that was the goal. So I mean, here I was being an owner operator for years and didn't even realize that I needed to get 100,000. That was beyond my understanding. I was trying to learn how to be an owner operator. So I was trying to learn how you're supposed to schedule maintenance, and I was learning how to do taxes, and I was running a lot of miles, like a lot of new owner operators. And I had no idea, no idea that I was supposed to be saving my money and aiming for $100,000. I mean, I knew that saving money was important for the truck maintenance, but that's all I knew, and you know, I was just trying to survive as an owner operator. These trucks back then didn't have a warranty, so when things came up on the truck, it kind of wiped you out, financially, and then you'd start all over. This would go on for years with those old trucks with no warranty. It's like you couldn't even dream of the day of having $100,000 with these old trucks, because the truck would take it. You'd be robbed on a regular basis. It's like every time I got $10,000, the truck would break down. I'd have to spend it. So it took me, I would say it took me like 5 years to get to the point where I had $50,000. And in that time frame, if I look back on it, I made decisions, I made some purchases that delayed me getting to $100,000. So during that first 5 years, I paid off a $30,000 student loan. Now that was an installment loan. I didn't have to pay it off. I mean, I think my student loan monthly payment was like $300 a month. But I had it for so long, I just wanted to get rid of it. I've been carrying that student loan around for 20 years. I wanted to get rid of it. But in hindsight, had I not paid off that student loan, I could have reached $100,000 sooner. But I did, so that's going to delay, getting to $100,000. I bought a used Silverado pickup. Um, It's had around 100,000 miles on it, and this is before inflation and stuff like this, and I paid like 22,000 for that. Now, in hindsight, that was a pretty good price, and I've had it ever since, and it's been wonderful. But I did spend another 22,000 that could have been used towards that $100,000 goal. But back then, I didn't know about this $100,000 goal. So it seemed like the right decision at the time. So right there between the student loan and the pickup truck, there was 50 grand right there within the first 5 years. And then I bought an RV. It was a used RV, but I bought it for like 15 grand. You know, Again, that's money I could have used, towards that 100,000. Um, you know, I bought tools. I'm not kidding. I probably spent $15,000 or more on tools because I had this hobby of buying tools. I enjoyed it, and I like Milwaukee tools, and I bought a lot of them, but that's money I could have saved towards that $100,000. So when you look back, now that I reached $100,000, I look back, I'm like, I could have done this about half the time. you know, it's like I could have reached $100,000 maybe at the 5 year point, instead of doing it at the 8 year point or the 9 year point, but it was something like, first of all, I didn't know the importance of having $100,000. I thought 50,000 was good, because I could handle most truck repairs if I had, and if worst case scenario came about, I would just go buy another truck, which is true. But here's the thing: when you reach $100,000, you got this is when compound interest kicks in. This is what you got to think about. Some years, um, you know, some years are really good. Other years are okay, but the historical average on the S&P 500 um, is 10% per year. So on an average year, 10% of $100,000 is an extra $10,000 for that year. In 3 years, that would be $30,000. So if I had just waited 3 years to pay off that student loan, which was $30,000, I could have had it paid for just from the compound interest of my investment. See, this was kind of like the mistake. It was like you paid off that student loan that you didn't have to pay off. It was $30,000. You could have put that $30,000 towards that goal of reaching $100,000 and then use compound interest. The interest alone on that $100,000 would have paid off your student loan. So this is kind of like the strategy, right? But you don't know this. I mean, I didn't know this. I'm financially illiterate. I didn't know this. I didn't understand it. And believe me, I had to watch a lot of videos about investing and read a lot about investing because I didn't know anything about it. It was like one of those things only rich people do. And I had never had any money, so I never really worried about it. It's like, well, I can't think about investing because I don't have anything to invest. It's like you can't worry about a problem if you don't have the tools to fix the problem. It's like, it's like anything in life. It's like, yeah, I agree that's a problem, but I'm powerless to do anything about it. It's not within my ability to fix it. So when you become an owner operator, you start making more money. Well, now you have the ability to fix it. And you're like, okay, I guess I got to learn how to do this because, no, I don't have any excuses not to do it. I have to, learn how to invest my money. So it took me a few years to get a handle on it. It really did. And I often recommend Professor G on YouTube channel. He has a 3 fund portfolio. That's been very helpful. I also subscribe to a stock picking service called Seeking Alpha, and I'll put links in the description when we're done. Seeking Alpha takes on a little more risk, but it's very interesting. And now that I reached $100,000 invested, I look back over those years. I could have got there so much quicker, so much quicker. But I made these purchases and paid off debt along the way. Um, is it a good strategy to have done that or bad? The thing you got to know about compound interest is that it will do a lot of heavy lifting for you. Like I said, on average, it's 10% per year. Some years it's 20%, 25%. So let's just say, for example, yet there's one good year where the S&P goes up 25%. Okay, you have a $30,000 loan you need to pay off. 1 year of compound interest on $100,000 is $25,000. The interest on that investment in and of itself could pay off your debt. You could, almost. I mean, you still have another 5,000 to go, but those are miles you don't have to drive. You're still paying off debt, but you're using compound interest to pay off your debt. See, that's the key. The key right there is use your money to grow money. Use compound interest. Like you may have a house payment, for example, okay? And you're like, man, I would love to pay off my house. So you spend the next 5 years paying off your house. And maybe that's $100,000, okay? So you saved all your money and you spent $100,000 to pay off your house. Now, what if you took that $100,000 and instead invested it, okay? And then just let your money grow, and okay, we're back. Okay, we're back. Bad area. We're in South Carolina. So 5 years of you're investing, and you're getting 25% return on 100,000. Well, 4 years of that, you get 25,000 compound interest every year. 4 years, your house would be paid for, and you didn't have to work. Your investment. This is the idea of being financially literate. Once you understand how investments can help you grow and save your money, then things seem possible. It's like, yeah, I can pay off my house, but I'm not gonna pay it off from my weekly earnings. I'm gonna let my investments pay off my house. So totally different way of looking at things. Because if you understand compound interest, you understand the value of having $100,000 invested, then you can use that to do a lot of things in life. You want your dream truck someday. Let your investments grow your money so that someday you can afford it. But if you spend your money along the way, like I did, you'll get there eventually, but it'll take you a very long time. Instead of getting there within 5 years, it might take you 10 years because you're spending your money, in chunks. Every few years and I know that's asking a lot, but it's something for you to think about. If you would just save your money, you could get to $100,000 probably within less than 5 years. Probably can do it nowadays with the modern trucks with warranties. You could probably reach $100,000 invested in less than 5 years. And once you did that, life would become easier. Everything will become easier. Maintenance becomes easier. Buying and selling trucks becomes easier. Paying off debt becomes easier. You could think about, retiring. That seems possible. Everything becomes easier. People say money doesn't make you happy. Well, I kind of disagree with that. Uh, yeah, in theory, you know, it wouldn't make you happy, but what would having $100,000 make you happy? I think it would. Now you'll be able to do stuff that you never been able to do before. You know, uh, if you had a truck that was broke down and you had no money, you'd be very unhappy. you know, but if you had a truck and it broke down, and you had $100,000, you would be very happy. So this idea that money doesn't make you happy, I think there's some fallacy in that. I think if you ask people who are homeless, they don't have any money. Are they happy? No, they're not happy. If you had $100,000 and you start getting compound interest, I think you're going to be very happy. So this idea that money can't make you happy, I think that's not necessarily true. I mean, we've heard that all of our lives. That this is kind of the idea that it's like, don't try to be rich because, rich people are miserable. No. Rich people are enjoying life. They don't, they don't stress out about making payments. See, people say money doesn't make you happy. Okay, well, conversely, if you don't have any money, how many sleepless nights you have because you're worried about paying your bills? You said money doesn't make you happy. So now you don't have any money. Are you happy? People who don't have money are not happy. People who have money are happy. So this idea that money doesn't make you happy is wrong. It's totally wrong. You should be working hard to have money. You need it. You need it to run your business. You need it to maintain your truck. You need it for retirement. You need it to buy a house. You need it to have a slightly better lifestyle, a standard of living. You know, money doesn't make you happy. Okay, you have no money, you're eating bologna. Okay, if you had money, you'd be eating steak. So this idea that money doesn't make you happy is wrong-headed thinking. Money definitely makes you happy because money buys you freedom. Money gives you options. Money buys you time. I would argue that you got to start being smart with money. Get rid of these ideas about pursuing money is not a noble thing to do. Actually, it's probably the best thing you can do, because if you are a generous person, okay, say you're very generous, you like to help other people. If you have no money, you can't help anybody. I mean, if you have absolutely, you can't give somebody $20. You need the $20. Now, conversely, if you have money and you want to help somebody out and you want to give them $20, you can do that. So this idea that, rich people are bad, you got to get rid of that mindset, because you could do a lot of good things if you had the money. I think if you don't have the money, so keep this in mind as you're spending money, as you are purchasing things as a new owner operator. The more stuff you buy, the longer it's going to take you to reach that $100,000. It is in your best interest and your long-term success to try to get that $100,000 invested, not saved, invested, because that's where compound interest kicks in. It's in your best interest to get to $100,000